Yeah. Kogency Reacts channel. How a Glasgow hit team terrorized the Scottish underworld for 9 months. Let's get into it.
It was an otherwise normal day in the late summer of 2018 when the police arrived at the door of Gary Moore, a 32-year-old gym owner and martial arts enthusiast from Airdrie in North Lanarkshire, to deliver what is referred to in Scotland as an Osman warning, a formal
To a gym owner and martial arts guy?
notification of an imminent threat to life. Moore showed little interest in the warning. He already knew he was in trouble with the local crime group, having failed to repay a significant debt. 4 weeks later, that threat would become a reality when Moore was mercilessly shot 9 times in the head and neck outside of his home. Police did not know it at the time, but this would not be the only act of public violence to be undertaken by a ruthless 3-man hit team that plagued the Glasgow underworld for almost 9 months. You are watching OCG TV.
OCG TV.
Just imagine this for a second. You're just...
Yeah. No free promo.
Our story begins a couple of months earlier. It was 6:30 p.m. on the 20th of July when established lawyer Joseph Shields, a director and senior partner of Gallen & Co., left his office with a colleague at the end of a working day. It was a warm Thursday evening and he was looking forward to Friday and the beginning of the weekend. Shields was suddenly bundled into from behind and suddenly felt sharp pain engulf his face and head. Blood started to spill down his body. He had been slashed multiple times by a man who had been lurking in the shadows for him to depart for the evening. The brazen nature of the attack was worrying. There had been yards from Glasgow Sheriff Court, surely one of the last locations that would be ideal for a targeted attack. Detectives began to look for motives and noted that Shields had defended one of the members of a gang that was described at the time as the most sophisticated of its kind ever seen in Scotland. David Sell, investigated under Operation Escalade, had been jailed for almost 16 years earlier the same year. Sell had been guilty of being part of a major crime group led by brothers Barry and James Gillespie.
Remember, we reacted to them.
They had also abducted one of their dealers, Robert Allen, who had failed to pay a debt of £30,000. Allen was tracked to Barnsley, kidnapped, and then tortured over several days. Sell gave an alibi that he was at the home of his friend David McFarlane's in Thornton Hall, Lanarkshire, on the day of the kidnap. Mr. McFarlane had a checkered past, having been evicted from the home of former Glasgow Rangers striker Shota Arveladze in 2014 for running up rental arrears of over £60,000. McFarlane was eventually jailed for perjury after Sell was convicted and given 15 years for his involvement in organised crime. Robert Allen was eventually shot in both knees and rolled down a hill naked next to a motorway in...
He made this indent, yeah. With his size, yeah, he definitely made all of these tracks on that hill, bro.
Glasgow. A significant...
But think about how traumatic that is, though.
...punishment for a debt of £30,000. Those in the Glasgow underworld who carried greater debts were about to be dealt a much more significant punishment. Chapter 2. Bad Debt. On the 6th of September 2018, Gary Moore was at home on Gartners Drive in Airdrie. He was heavily involved in the mixed martial arts and Thai boxing scene in southern Scotland and worked locally at a silent fitness gym. He hosted self-defense classes and had previously competed in boxing events.
Well, I guess maybe the things on the wall kind of show say, you know, maybe him love the gangsterness from all the time. Cause I'm sure this is a gangster poster for a movie, Vendetta. I've never watched it, but this don't look like a love story.
Did self-defense classes and had previously competed in...
And what's this on the next one? Dickle Bardon? Yeah, I don't even want to say that.
...boxing events. From the outside, Moore seemed successful. He owned an apartment in the Murcia region of Spain and had a motorhome at a holiday park in Ayrshire. But Moore had a secret, one that would prove fatal. At around 8:30 p.m, a man identified as Neil Anderson was said to have come out of a hired Berlingo van and knocked on Mr. Moore's front door. He was holding a bag of chips and was joined outside the property by Moore. Mr. Moore engaged with a dog in a passing BMW before he returned to speak to Neil Anderson. During this moment, a white Skoda Fabia turned on the street and drove towards Mr. Moore's home. A man exits the vehicle. He is wearing a hooded top and blue latex gloves and is in possession of a handgun pointing in the direction of Moore. Moore turned around and looked in the direction of the vehicle. He appeared to flinch, putting his hands in the air as if to protect himself. The gunman let off a series of shots, hitting Moore in the head and neck, killing him instantly. The attack was as ferocious as it was fast. The Skoda sped off immediately after the shooting and was found later burnt out in Milngavie in Dunbartonshire. Police and ambulances raced to the property, but it was too late to
Milngavie in Dunbartonshire. Bro, that sounds like you're casting a spell, bro. What are you saying to me?
resuscitate Gary Moore. Neil Anderson, meanwhile, had left the scene. His behaviour was deemed suspicious by detectives, having only spent a total of 13 minutes at the property, which coincided with a hitman arriving and killing Moore. Anderson was known to police. He had a background as a car salesman, but had evidential links to the Glasgow Underworld. Only 5 years previous, he had been cleared of involvement in a £7 million cocaine case. Police were told of his frequent visits to Gary Moore's home in the run-up to the killing, and were also made aware that Moore was in debt to a gang to the tune of £100,000. Obvious connections were made that Anderson had been sent to put pressure on Moore to pay up.
How did gym owner end up with $100,000 debt?
And eventually set him up on the day of his murder. Anderson was subsequently arrested.
You see, the reason why I wasn't talking when that guy was on the screen, because I was like, yeah, him just looked like somebody you shouldn't trust. I was just looking at him, and those were the thoughts going through my head. Look at this smug look on his face right here, bro. You know what I'm saying? He don't look like... Yeah, I was just like, yeah, whatever they said he did, yeah, he did it. Yeah, he was a part of it. I don't even need to hear the details. I can see it on his face.
Anderson had been sent to put pressure on Moore to pay up, and eventually set him up on the day of his murder. Anderson was subsequently arrested and put on trial at Glasgow High Court, where these suspicions were confirmed. Moore's neighbour revealed that he had delivered money to a man in Bothwell, South Lanarkshire, on behalf of Moore, and that he had met that same man at the scene of the murder, referring to Anderson. Moore's sister also gave evidence at his trial where she had revealed she had suspected that he was involved in illegal drugs. He had asked her for £5,000 a few months before he was killed, after telling her he needed to pay something earlier than he thought he had to pay it, but she refused. Anderson pled his innocence but did not convince his jury and was jailed for a minimum of 22 years.
What innocence could you plead?
The question remained, who were the hit team? Police linked the car used in the shooting to a young man named Thomas Guthrie. The car had been left in the same location as the getaway vehicle that had been left after the slashing of lawyer Joseph Shields. Police started to connect the dots and realised that the incidents were being orchestrated by the same overarching organised crime gang. There was still more to come. Chapter 3. The Car Park. On the 3rd of December in 2018, Scott Bennett left Bray's farm in Chapelton with a dog in his arms. He was heading to Taylor Vets in Rutherglen, but not for reasons you might expect.
The names of these places,
Bennett was indeed a dog breeder. He owned Platinum Pet Care and Canine Fertility in Straven, Lanarkshire. However, bringing the dog with him that night was just a ruse. He had in fact been summoned to a meeting by a mystery individual within the Glasgow Underworld. Bennett was another individual who was suspected to have involvement in organised crime in Scotland.
How does the pet store owner guy the dog? How does the dog guy get a 50k debt?
He had got himself into a debt of around £50,000,
How?
as evidenced by EncroChat phone evidence revealed in court later in 2022.
Oh, his secret life as drug dealer.
He was
I mean, obviously, but it's like why? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I need little backstory as to like how did you just go from dog breeder to or where you're always a drug dealer and you use the money to go into dog breeding and then the drug dealing eventually just came up to a point, or where you're dog breeding and then drug dealing. You know, I just maybe those little details would help me out just a little bit.
was vulnerable to attack and hoped he could straighten things out with his superiors. His trust was misplaced. He arrived in a white Peugeot hire van into the car park and reversed his van into a parking bay. A short time later, a BMW arrived and pulled nose first into the space to the left of Bennett's vehicle. Seconds later, a figure with a bag strapped over his shoulder was seen exiting the passenger seat and raising his arm and pointing a weapon towards Bennett's van before firing a single shot into his face. The bullet, fired from an Austrian Glock self-loading pistol, entered the left side of his head, passed through his teeth and tongue before lodging in his neck, where it remains to this day. Bennett somehow managed to drive himself away from the scene, screeching into the car park of nearby takeaway called the Blue Rupee, crashing into a plant pot and staggered into the takeaway area where he collapsed in a pool of blood. It was another shocking display of violence in a public arena, just 3 months since Gary Moore had been shot on his doorstep. Police Scotland suspected the attacks were targeted and linked. There are not many groups that have the resources to pay for 2 separate hits within such a short space of time. Many variables were similar. The 2-man team arriving in a stolen vehicle, the in-out speed and ruthlessness of the action. It was professional. The silver coupe was later found burnt out a mile away on the remote Cathkin Braes. Detectives were convinced the bloodshed wasn't over yet. They'd be right. Chapter 4. A New Role. Rafał Lajko, a 36-year-old Polish national, landed at Edinburgh Airport on the 9th of February 2019. He was in a positive mood, considerably more positive than when he had left to go back to his native Poland. He had been involved in criminal activities in his adopted homeland for many years. He had spent 4 months in Scottish prison for his involvement with a Bulgarian criminal who had orchestrated the murder of a local businessman. He was jailed for 4 months in 2012 after being caught attempting to pass a smartphone watch to Dejan Nikolov in Perth prison. Nikolov had been sentenced to a minimum of 18 years for his part in a plot to murder Mohammed Nadim Siddiq in Glenrothes, Fife, in October 2010.
Why though?
He had moved back to his hometown of Pruszków after his release from Scotland, but the lure of the underworld never went away.
Never went away.
Lajko's path had become unfortunately familiar. He owed a Glaswegian drug gang a considerable sum of money and couldn't pay it back. Upon his arrival from Poland, his cousin picked him up and took him to Perthshire to see
how do they end up like not being able to pay these things back? Like, is it a setup thing or something?
Family and pick up a car. He confided in his cousin that the people he owed money to had arranged a job overseas to pay the money back. They were going to send him to Valencia in Spain, where he was to rent a flat and work for them. He showed his cousin text messages between him and his contact. Lajko asked a woman if he could speak to Eddie about the cash he owed. She told him, "I will contact Eddie and give him your number if that helps," adding, "You are to pay your debt. Do you have it?" Lajko replied, "Not yet, but I'm working on it."
Yo.
The woman then told him, "Bit late for that."
Bit late for that.
A meeting was arranged to meet Eddie in Glasgow to discuss the job.
Imagine how how his heart dropped when he saw that message. Bit late for that. What? Like if you never have like music playing in your life, music start play right there. So some Law and Order music start play or something, bro. Yeah, fam, that's intense.
Valencia. Cameras captured Mr. Lyko's movements after he had driven back from Perth in his mother's bronze-coloured Mercedes B-Class. Shortly after leaving the KFC at Palace Grounds Retail Park, he is seen parking the vehicle in Lightburn Road, Cambuslang. He is then seen exiting the motor and getting into a 4x4 Mercedes GLE, which drives off in the direction of Blantyre shortly after 7:30 p.m. What Lyko didn't know was that the Mercedes had been stolen in the Oxgangs area of Edinburgh the previous month, and that specific car was being used for good reason. Just 10 minutes later, that Mercedes was spotted by a member of the public at the entrance of Greenhall Park. It had been set alight, with Mr. Lyko still inside. Police rushed to the scene to find the vehicle ablaze, with the passenger door wide open. Raphael Lyko had been shot in the head. The gun was lying in the footwell next to him, damaged in the fire. Lyko was so badly burnt that it took extensive examinations lasting several days to be able to identify him.
Wow.
Police were clueless as to what had gone on, but after extensive inquiries into Lyko's past, it was the information from his cousin that confirmed the motive. It had happened again. Another individual who had fallen into debt with a major criminal gang in Glasgow and paid the price. In the space of only 9 months, 2 men had been shot dead, another shot in the head but lived, and a criminal lawyer slashed outside his workplace. This was violence typically seen in places like South America, not a civilized Western society.
Like Narcos Colombia.
The question remained, who had done it?
Who?
Chapter 5. The Hit Team. Detectives from Police Scotland struggled with the initial investigations. The motive for the murders were clear, but it would take almost 2 years before an arrest was made. Thomas Guthrie was charged with his role in the murder of Gary Moore in 2021. Police were satisfied he was not the shooter, but was in fact the getaway driver.
Oh, he was
Guthrie
had
gone on something of a petty crime spree a short time previously. He had conducted 7 street robberies in 1 hour during one day in Glasgow and was already in jail by the time he was charged with driving the getaway vehicle. He was sentenced to life in prison, opting not to name his accomplice who pulled the trigger. Neil Anderson would also get a life sentence for his role in luring Moore out of his home.
So nothing more than he was in jail and he probably said something and they tied him to it or something. I'm thinking.
Major investigations were still ongoing into the murder of...
Or maybe they had evidence on him. But I didn't hear any evidence on him. That's what I'm hearing though. Let me go back a bit and see.
And was already in jail by the time he was charged with driving the...
Yeah, he was just charged. They were just saying, yeah, he's a driver and thing like that. Maybe some DNA evidence in the car, maybe.
...getaway vehicle. He was sentenced to life in prison, opting not to name his accomplice who pulled the trigger. Neil Anderson would also get a life sentence for his role in luring Moore out of his home. Major investigations were still ongoing into the murder of Raphael Lyko and the attempted murder of Scott Bennett. Detectives knew they would be linked, but the key to finding the shooter had yet to be found. Extensive inquiries would lead them to a man named Barry Harvey.
Brother, this guy
Harvey
like
was a local thug who had previously served a 9-year sentence for a knife attack on a former friend.
I'm your local thug.
He was a promising footballer, having played in the youth team of Partick Thistle before turning to a life of crime.
What is that?
The relationship between Guthrie and Harvey was described by a key witness who gave evidence in court. Roy Bennett claimed his former friend Guthrie feared Harvey but wanted to be like him.
What?
He was impressed by Harvey and wanted to be his friend.
Beg friend.
He explained that he met the pair after being summoned by Guthrie late one night. They wanted him to drive them to a remote location in Baldonock, Dumbartonshire, because they were looking to dump a stolen car that had been used in a knife attack on the lawyer Joe Shields. This was the same location that the car used in the shooting of Gary Moore was found burnt out. The circumstantial evidence was also mounting against Harvey. Shortly after the hits, despite being registered unemployed, He had taken trips to Krakow and Australia with his girlfriend. He had also splashed out on a new set of veneers. Considerable costs for an individual without any means
You
of
don't got no
legitimate
job.
income.
You ain't got no job.
A second witness, Harvey and Guthrie's associate Scott Brown, gave vital evidence at the trial that helped convict the men. He claimed he was told by Guthrie to follow the Skoda to a farm in Baldernock, East Dunbartonshire, where it was set on fire. He then drove the pair to a property, and they went off into another
Dunbartonshire,
room
it was
before
set on
Mr.
fire.
Brown left. At the time of the shooting, Guthrie was using a phone which belonged to his dad, which was later seized by police. On hearing this, Guthrie was overheard saying to his dad that there was likely going to be incriminating evidence found.
Incriminating your dad in
A
this
third
as well.
man was to complete the deadly
Implicating your dad in
hitman
this
trio.
as well.
Darren Owen was only 18
This
years
guy looks like some villain in an Avengers movie or something.
old when he was involved in the attempted murder of Scott
18.
Bennett and collecting the stolen car that picked up Rafał Lyko. He is the brother of Jordan Owen, jailed for 22 years for the shooting of Jamie Lee in Castlemilk and becoming an international fugitive abroad before being arrested in Portugal. The evidence was stacked against the men, and after a mammoth 12-week trial at the High Court in Glasgow, the guilty verdict was unanimous. Guthrie had already been sentenced for his part in the Moore murder and was due to run until 2041, but the judge, Lord
2041.
Clark, gave him an additional 8 years.
So he might come out 2050.
Barry Harvey was found guilty of the murder of Gary Moore and the attempted murder of Scott Bennett. He was given a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years.
To call it a 30.
Darren Owen was found guilty of the murder of Rafał Lyko and the attempted murder of Scott Bennett and sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years.
Oh my god.
Upon sentencing, Detective Superintendent Andrew Patrick
Yo,
said,
why you look like that?
"Each of these serious incidents were challenging inquiries to work on individually, and our officers were meticulous in going through every detail in what was an incredibly protracted investigation.
Protracted.
The violence involved in each of these cases, which resulted in the death of 2 men, is absolutely senseless. Although these were all targeted attacks, these individuals showed no regard for the communities and families affected. I believe these sentences show those intent on committing crime that no matter how much preparation you make, how many steps you take to frustrate an investigation, or how long it has been since the crime has been committed, that we will not give up."
That's true.
The case brings to a close an unprecedented level of violence seen in the Scottish underworld, and the sentences handed out will surely make others think twice. Thanks again to...
Well, I was never gonna join any underworld because I don't go under nothing. I don't go under nothing. You see it. But W video though. Big up OCG TV. I love that video. Very informative. I like how the information was presented and everything. You know? 20 minutes to, nice time and everything. You know what I'm saying? So I like that. If you made it to the end of this video, hit the like button. For me, please, and my opinion as well. If you want to check out OCG TV, the video will be in the description below. My other links are in the description below. Check out the music channel, gaming channel, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere. Yeah, hit the like button, jump in the comments, share the video if you can, and subscribe. Subscribe to me. Subscribe. And yep, levels going good. And I'm out.